At 5:46 a.m., my phone exploded with a call so bizarre, so wildly out of bounds that it shook me awake faster than any alarm ever could. The HOA was demanding immediate access to my private sauna for what they calmly described as their sunrise rituals. That was the moment I realized something was deeply, hilariously, and maybe dangerously wrong in my neighborhood. And that single call would pull me into a spiral of secrets, bizarre meetings, and a community board more unhinged than anyone could imagine. When I first moved into Oak Ridge Meadows, I thought I was stepping into a peaceful, well-organized suburban haven. You know the type: polite head nods, trimmed hedges, mailboxes that matched, and an HOA that mostly cared about lawn, heights, and whether your holiday lights were tastefully modest. Nothing could have prepared me for the insanity lurking beneath all that controlled perfection. Certainly not the kind that would involve strange chants, unofficial ceremonies, or a group of board members who spoke in cryptic sentences before sunrise. So when my phone rang that morning, my first guess was a plumbing leak, a stray raccoon, or maybe one of those passive-aggressive complaints about the color, temperature of my porch lights. But the voice on the other end wasn't irritated. It was eager, too eager. Mr. Harland, the HOA president, said they needed immediate, unquestioned access to my sauna. Not later, not at a scheduled inspection time. Now, before dawn. For rituals. Naturally, I asked what rituals. Because what else do you ask when the people who enforce trash bin rules start sounding like members of a secret order? That's when he lowered his voice and said, "It's the day of warmth. We must begin before the sun does." No further explanation. No context. Just a request that felt like it had been ripped straight out of a strange indie horror film. I refused, obviously. My sauna is for relaxation, sweating out stress, and, importantly, not for the ceremonial gatherings of my HOA. But Harlan didn't respond with frustration. He sighed, almost like he expected my answer, and then delivered a final line I'll never forget. "You'll understand soon. The neighborhood always understands eventually." The call ended, but the uneasiness didn't. And that morning, as the sun finally rose, I noticed something I had never seen before. Figures, gathered near the community garden, moving in a slow, strangely synchronized pattern. I stood there frozen, wondering if I had misunderstood everything about this place. Maybe it was harmless, maybe it was theatrical, or maybe I had moved into a neighborhood with traditions no realtor had ever dared to mention. Whatever the truth was, I knew one thing: this was only the beginning of something stranger. The moment I stepped outside to get a closer look at the synchronized figures, I realized this was no ordinary HOA gathering. There were about a dozen of them, all dressed in identical beige robes, the kind that looked suspiciously like repurposed bathrobes from a discount spa outlet. They moved slowly in a perfect circle, hands raised, humming in a low tone that vibrated faintly through the early morning air. For a moment, I genuinely wondered if I was still half asleep and dreaming something ridiculous. But the cold concrete under my bare feet confirmed it. This was real. I stayed hidden behind the hedges bordering my yard, watching as the group shifted their formation. One of them, a short, round man with a clipboard, stepped forward like he was about to conduct a performance. He tapped the clipboard 3 times, and the humming stopped instantly. That level of coordination would have impressed me if it weren't happening at sunrise in my neighborhood, by people who should have been preparing for their day jobs instead of reenacting scenes from a mystical handbook. Then I spotted Mr. Harland among them. He wasn't in a robe. He wore his usual pressed polo, khakis, and the same self-important expression. He scanned the houses like he was performing some kind of census for non-compliance. When his gaze drifted toward mine, I ducked instinctively, feeling ridiculous but unwilling to risk being spotted. I wasn't ready for another lecture about community, unity, or whatever justification he had for trying to borrow my sauna pre-dawn. Suddenly, the group raised their arms in unison, and the man with the clipboard announced, "The heat of the community must be shared. Only then can the cycle continue." The others murmured in agreement, as though this made perfect, obvious sense. I had no idea what cycle they were referring to, but I was starting to suspect that sauna access was only the tip of the iceberg. After several minutes of cryptic chanting, they broke formation and began dispersing silently. No talking, no checking their phones, no small talk about weekend plans. Just quiet, eerie precision. As they drifted down the sidewalks like robed ghosts, I felt a creeping dread mixed with curiosity. What exactly had I moved into? Was this some long-standing tradition? A bizarre initiation? Or something newer? Something they were building toward? When I finally stepped back inside, I noticed a new envelope slipped under my door. No stamp, no name. just a symbol that looked like 3 wavy lines stacked on each other. Inside was a single message. Your participation is expected. I stared at the message, unsure whether to laugh or panic. Whatever this was turning into, it clearly wasn't stopping. If you want Chapter 3, just tell me. I spent most of the morning pacing around my kitchen, the envelope still lying on the counter like a tiny paper-wrapped threat. Your participation is expected. Expected by whom? Expected for what? I kept replaying the sunrise gathering in my head, trying to make sense of it. But the more I thought, the stranger it seemed. And the stranger it seemed, the more I realized I had 2 choices: confront the HOA directly or pretend nothing had happened and hope they moved on. Unfortunately for me, the HOA was not the kind of group that simply moved on. By noon, there was a knock at my door. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I froze. For a moment I considered hiding behind the couch, but curiosity pushed me forward. When I opened the door, it wasn't Harland or any robed neighbor. It was Mrs. Delaney, the soft-spoken treasurer of the HOA, holding a tray of muffins like she'd stepped out of a wholesome commercial. Except her smile was just a little too tight, her eyes a little too focused. "I thought you might want a warm welcome," she said. "We know yesterday was surprising. The community adapts best when everyone is aligned." I nodded cautiously, unsure whether this was a threat wrapped in blueberry batter. She stepped closer. "The day of warmth is important to us. Heat is symbolic here. It binds us. Your sauna is uniquely positioned in the neighborhood's energy map, so naturally, involvement is essential." Energy map? Binding? I wondered if the HOA had collectively inhaled too many cleaning fumes. Before I could respond, she placed the muffin tray into my hands and lowered her voice. "Tonight, we're having a meeting. Mandatory for all homeowners. We'll explain everything then." Mandatory, of course. She left with no further explanation, drifting down the sidewalk like she was gliding rather than walking. I shut the door, locked it twice, and leaned against it. A mandatory meeting after cryptic chanting and demands for ritual sauna access did not sit well with me. But ignoring them would probably make things worse. As evening approached, I made my way to the community center, half expecting to find candles, incense, and someone in a hooded cloak. Instead, the room was perfectly ordinary. Cheap chairs, stale coffee, and a projector that hummed too loudly. But the atmosphere was tense, like everyone knew something I didn't. Harlan stood at the front, smiling like a man about to unveil a secret he'd been dying to share. "Tonight," he announced, "we discuss the next phase of our unity." I sat down slowly, realizing I was in much deeper than I'd ever imagined. To continue to Chapter 4, just tell me. Things were escalating faster than I expected, and I felt completely unprepared today. The room fell silent as Harland clicked the projector remote, revealing the first slide, a glowing, stylized map of Oak Ridge Meadows. Except this wasn't any map I'd ever seen before. The streets were there, sure, but overlaid with swirling lines, strange symbols, and highlighted energy centers that made the whole neighborhood look like a cross between a yoga retreat, blueprint, and the schematic for a mystical furnace. "As many of you know," Harlan began, sounding far too pleased with himself, "our community is built on a natural geothermal harmony. The warmth beneath our homes connects us, strengthens us, and ensures the well-being of everyone who lives here." I glanced around. Some people nodded like this was old news. Others looked as confused as I felt. A few stared blankly, either asleep with eyes open or dissociating for survival. Harlan tapped the screen. "But the cycle only works when all of the heat centers are properly activated. And this year, one essential component has remained inaccessible." His eyes locked onto me. "The sauna." A few heads turned my way, and I suddenly felt like the kid in class who hadn't done his group project. He continued, "The sauna sits at the node of convergence. Without it, the day of warmth cannot be completed. We must maintain balance. We must honor the tradition." Mrs. Delaney chimed in, her tone soothing but unsettling. "No one is asking for anything unreasonable. A brief, respectful ritual. You wouldn't even need to be present." That somehow made it worse. I raised my hand. "Why me? Why my sauna? And what exactly does this ritual involve? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels odd." Harlan sighed with exaggerated patience. "It's simply community bonding. A symbolic gathering of heat. We chant, acknowledge our unity, and align the warmth of the neighborhood. Nothing dangerous, nothing harmful. We've done it for years. Then why didn't the previous homeowner mention it?" I asked. The room shifted uncomfortably. Harlan's smile twitched. "Some homeowners are less committed to the communal philosophy. But you seem open-minded." "Right. That's exactly how I'd describe myself while being voluntold, to host a sunrise ritual." Before I could argue further, the projector changed slides again. This time it displayed a list titled Ritual Access Schedule, and next to sauna node activation, in bold letters, was the phrase, Tomorrow before dawn. Mandatory. My pulse thudded. You can't force me to open my home for this. Harlan clasped his hands. We're not forcing. We're encouraging. Strongly. For the greater good. The meeting adjourned shortly after, but the tension in the room stayed thick enough to choke on. Walking home, I realized the HOA wasn't just eccentric. They were escalating. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined a line of robe-wearing neighbors, marching toward my house with ceremonial ladles and clipboards. By the time 4:30 a.m. rolled around, I was wide awake, pacing the living room like someone preparing for a hostage negotiation. Mandatory or not, I wasn't about to let the HOA invade my home before dawn. At 5:10 a.m., I heard footsteps outside, soft at first, then multiplying. I peeked through the curtains. There they were, a slow-moving procession of robed residents heading straight for my backyard gate. At the front stood Harlan, holding a small brass bowl that emitted a faint trail of steam, like he was carrying soup for a ghost. I opened the back door before they could knock. Stop right there, I said loudly. No rituals, no chanting, no sauna access. I'm not participating. Harlan looked wounded, as though I had personally insulted the ancient spirit of geothermal harmony. We were hoping you'd reconsider, he said. The neighborhood depends on this. The neighborhood depends on people minding their business, I replied. My sauna is not a community shrine. Mrs. Delaney stepped forward. We understand your hesitation, but the ritual must continue. If the sauna cannot participate, we must use an alternate heat node. She pointed toward my shed. No, I said instantly. Absolutely not. That's where I keep my lawn tools. Harlan sighed. Then you leave us no choice. Before I could ask what that meant, the group formed a circle directly in my yard. They raised their arms, humming loudly. The same deep vibration as before, but with an urgent edge. Steam rose from the brass bowl, swirling upward as if pulled by invisible strings. For a moment, I thought they might actually summon something. Then the sprinkler system turned on. The sudden jets of cold water blasted the entire group, soaking robes, clipboards, and ceremonial steam alike. The humming stopped immediately. Harlan sputtered. Mrs. Delaney shrieked. The brass bowl clattered to the ground. It was chaos, wet, shivering chaos. I couldn't help it. I laughed. The group scattered, muttering about disrupted energy, alignment, and the cycle being postponed. Harlan glared at me as water dripped from his polo. This isn't over, he warned. But it was. Later that day, the HOA sent a formal notice stating that all ritual activities had been indefinitely suspended pending review. Apparently, getting ambushed by sprinklers wasn't part of the sacred tradition. And just like that, the sauna crisis ended. Not with fire, but with water. The neighborhood has been strangely quiet ever since. Almost like everyone is pretending none of it ever happened. But I know, quiet is just Oak Ridge Meadows holding its breath.